Okay.
Hello, welcome to another Soul Horse Sunday conversation. And today my guest is Lynn Mann, and she's the author of many, many books, most notably the Horses Know series. And so we're going to be talking about some things that inspired her to write a book that contained such a spiritual message from her horses, and ways that we can look forward to, I believe, partnering with our horses in the future as we learn to expand how we perceive them and how we perceive spirituality. So Lynn, would you like to introduce yourself?
I mean, you kind of just said it, really. Yeah, I started writing the first book in the series just because I'd spent so long in the company of a very special piebald. I think you say paint in the States, don't you?
Yes.
Black and white mare with blue eyes who I felt, as soon as she was with me, I felt like she was the one I'd been looking for my whole life. And as soon as she was with me, I just kind of breathed out and thought, okay, we're all good now. She's here. We can do this. And I just thought that meant that I'd found my horse of a lifetime and we were going to have a lovely time together. I had no idea what else was going to happen. Consciously, I had no idea what else was going to happen. And as a result of all the experiences I had with her, I couldn't contain it all, and it all kind of blurted out into a book. And that was the Horses Know. And it surprised me how well that was received. So I wrote a sequel. I was surprised again by how well that was received. So I kind of kept writing, and I haven't really stopped.
You have a phenomenal amount of books. How many books do you have?
There are 10 now. There are 6 in the main series, and then there are 3 prequels to that series, which are the backstories of 3 of the main characters. And then there's a book of companion stories, which just delves into a few of the more minor characters. So I get curious about some of the characters that have popped into my head, and I kind of think, oh, I'd quite like to know that one a bit better. So I do a little story about him, and my brain just dots around all over the place when I'm writing. So the books haven't come out in sequence. They've kind of come out as and when the characters started talking in my head, and I thought, oh yeah, I better write that down.
What I was thinking is the books came out in the order in which they could be received.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I'd like to think that it was just that case, but I think also in the order that I needed to process the issues that are the content of those books. I'd be being dishonest to say I've just written things for other people to read. I'm aware now, I wasn't necessarily at the time, but I'm aware now that I've written books that have helped me to process things that I needed to process. So I think it's a combination of both, I think.
So I just take a note here a minute. When you said that you got this piebald or this paint, that in real life her name is,
her name? Well, she's no longer with me, sadly, but her name was Pi.
Okay, Pi, and yeah. She's Infinity in the books. Yes. And so do you feel like when you got her, you said you felt like you felt this piece come together, and this was, something that was like ordained, by the universe for you. Do you feel like you actually channeled through her, or the ideas through her, or were you just inspired? How do you think that happened? How did she fit the role of you starting to write these books?
She'd been with me for she came to me in 2000, and I started writing in about 2010, 11, something like that. So she'd been with me 10, 11 years or so before I started writing the first book. And in that time, she'd taught me so much, she'd changed me so much, and she was so consistent in her viewpoint that by the time I started to write the book, some of it is based on my experiences with her. It's either inspired by or directly based on experiences we had together. When it came for Infinity to give counsel or to say something or whatever that wasn't from my direct experience, I only had to hold Pi in my mind and know exactly what she would have said. if that answers your question.
Yes, sort of. I just have so many questions about the whole thing because I'm obsessed with spirituality. And so do you feel like, did she give you, because this conversation is about how horses fulfill their role in our spiritual journey. It sounds like she was completely involved in your spiritual journey. Did she give you the idea of being horse bonded, or is that something you've always held? For those who haven't read the books, in this book, these people and these horses, certain people and horses are horse bonded. They were like predestined to come together, and they can hear each other's thoughts. They work together, but not everyone is horse bonded. Only a few people are horse bonded.
I think it's hard to say whether I wasn't aware of her directly giving me that idea. After a few years of being with her, I remember talking to the owner of the rescue centre that I adopted her from and just saying, there's going to be a book about this horse one day, because she's incredible. She's even more incredible than I thought she was going to be when I first came across her. And I actually started to write it down as a non-fictional account of our time together, and how she communicated with me, what she'd taught me and what had happened. And I just couldn't seem to get the words out. I just felt really blocked, and it felt all wrong and stilted. So I just stopped and left it. And then as a result of that, I think when I was with her, and often when I was just in her stable, mucking out her stable, and she was out in the field, but I'd always get a sense of her, very strong sense of her when I was in her stable. I always found it a calming place to be, whether she was in there or not. I just started to get this idea for a fictional story that was kind of based around the same kind of thing that she and I had gone through. And as soon as I started to think of that, I couldn't stop writing notes down. And then when I actually started writing, it all just came tumbling out. So, yeah, I mean, the horse bonded are definitely based on my experience of my relationship with Pi.
So I actually have a few notes here. I was taking them on my phone last night, so I'll have to look here. Okay. There was a couple of things in there that I really find interesting, and one of them is you refer to perfect balance, and towards the end of the first book, and then it carries on and through the other books. And perfect balance, it starts out, it seems to me, if my memory serves me correct, that it sounds like you're maybe a dressage rider. You believe in actually supporting the horse through the reins and proper tack and legs and all of that to get them to lift.
I think I believe in supporting them any way that is necessary for the rider to support them, to be honest. I mean, I wrote The Horses Know and how Amarilla supported Infinity was based on how I needed to support Pi. If I'd been a better rider, would I have needed bridle and saddle? Possibly not, but that's where I was at the time. And I actually started off riding her in a head collar because I just thought, I don't need to control her as such. We'll see how we go. But she was very unhappy with the situation. She needed far more support from me. And I think from where I was as a rider at that time, I needed the feedback that she would give me through the reins to have an extra sense of when she was leaning forward on them and when I needed to do more with my legs and my seat and my body. So in terms of helping her to perfect balance, it was a case of her hanging in with me because I wasn't a good enough rider to do that, as Amarilla isn't when she first starts to ride. I wasn't a good enough rider to do that at the time, so I needed extra things to help me out and give me extra feedback as to what she needed. And it was our relationship was very much a case of, as soon as she knew I was listening, she was very, very clear that she wanted me to help her physically to achieve more connection and balance, so that it kind of came about because conformationally she had very short cannon bones in her front legs and very long ones in her back legs, so she'd have little pony boots on her front legs and full-size horse ones on the back legs. So she was actually built kind of downhill, as you would say. On top of that, she was put in foal to a very big stallion, judging by the size of the foal, when she was only 3 years old. So it all pulled her undercarriage and her back right down. So as a result of that, when I had her as a 4-year-old from rescue, she was very compromised physically, and she didn't feel strong or powerful or empowered, physically able to express her full physicality, really, because of everything that had happened. So obviously with her being in that situation, me then sitting on her back compromised her more. But she was very, very clear with me that she wanted me there, and she wanted me to learn how to help her to change that, to be able to connect, to be able to lift up, carry her weight on her hind end, open through the chest and feel empowered. So that was really the basis of our relationship, was her making it very clear what she wanted me to do, and being very black and white about what I needed to do in order to do that, and use what I needed to use to do it. And I had to change. She made it very apparent that I wasn't a good enough rider to do it, and I had to change physically hugely. And as you know, in order to change physically, the way one carries oneself is a reflection of how we are emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So every time something came up that I realised I needed to make a physical change in order to support her more, so that she could change, I had to change, make the mental and emotional, possibly spiritual changes before I could make that change. So we had this kind of interplay between us, and she was very, very clear when I was on the wrong track, and very, very clear when I was on the right track. And so that kind of is the story. I mean, Amarilla achieves it in a few months. It took me about 16 years. So that was very much kind of the interplay between the two of us, and that is, a representation of what happened and what she wanted from me and what we achieved as a result.
Okay, so you said, and this ties into the book, you said that she wanted to have you help her get on her hind end and open her hind end and open her chest. And in the books, when they do this, the horses, I might have this exactly detailed, right? But from my memory from the books, is when the horses do this, when they achieve perfect balance, it also ties into how they release emotions and memories in their bodies from lifetimes, and they act it out.
That's what came through to me. I didn't plan to write that. I kind of took that from knowing from knowing what happened to me, because that's what happened to me. Is that I was very underconfident, and my posture was kind of rounded shoulders. I would always protect my heart. My left shoulder in particular would come round. I was always very protective of this kind of area. Well, to be supportive to her, I could not be there at all. I had to learn to be strong through my core, to sit and be able to support her through my body and my seat and my legs. In order to do that, I had to open at the chest, and it was the heart issue that Amarilla goes through in the horses know is something that I went through, and it was a very difficult and transformational experience, but one that was very necessary in order for me to be able to be that for her. So it's not something I have experience of horses doing, but I do know that when they're pushed on the forehand and they're kind of being forced into that position that I was in physically before I opened, they do tend to shut down emotionally. So that was my kind of way of representing that. Okay, well, if I know that happens, so if they're helped to kind of sit and open at the chest, knowing that I cleared an awful lot of things when I did that, that was kind of my way of trying to suggest that horses could be empowered in the same way.
I think that's just a brilliant way of being. I lean forward too much when I ride. People are always, and I find that I hinge from my hips. It isn't just my shoulders. I just lean forward too much. Yeah, and I know that a lot of it has to do with what you're saying as far as life, opening up to life, as well as opening up to everything that the horse has to offer in your roles together, both physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, everything.
Yeah.
I have go ahead.
It's a vulnerable place to be to start with, for the horse and the rider, when you first start to do it, especially if you're not very strong there. And Pi was very, very emotional, especially if she didn't feel that I quite had her with my legs, and that I might let her go and she'd be dropped forward to that place where she was kind of rounded and shut down again. So it's a vulnerable place to be, and it needed me to find a level of confidence that I would have had no idea I could find ever. I'd never been particularly confident rider. I was very confident around horses on the ground, but up until she really pushed me to work on that. I'd never been hugely confident in my ability as a rider, or my ability to be physically able to support a horse that way. And I did it because I cared about her so much, and I was just so, she made it so clear what she wanted, and I was so desperate to help her that I would do whatever I had to do to help her, really.
Well, in real life, I have a friend that I had read The Horses Know, the first book, and at the end, when they have that situation where they get perfect balance, and then Infinity acts out all of her lives, and because they're horse bonded, she shows everything going on in her mind to Amarilla, and so she understands the lifetimes, the abuse, the desperation, the love. And I have a friend that this happened probably, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 months after I had read the first Horses Know. And she had gotten this lovely mare, and she came to her, I think she was under 2 years old, maybe 18 months old, something like that. And she was just working with her in the round pen one day, and the mare just had a ballistic episode. And my friend doesn't push too much. So she was on the ground, and she was just working the horse in the round pen. And suddenly Stoika just lost her mind. She literally started bolting her mouth wide open, bawling and defecating and urinating and wringing her tail all at the same time, like this massive. It just makes me cry when I think about the turmoil and the intensity that caused that horse to do it. And so I told Erin about what I had read in the books, and I said, that makes such sense, that if suddenly a horse is releasing or it overwhelms them, and they do have these memories, whether it's this lifetime or other lifetimes before. I do believe in other lifetimes, but not everyone does. But possibly in this horse's youth, she the story goes that she had probably had some pretty rough training, way too young. But watching that horse release that and go through that trauma was just unbelievable. But it matched so much what had been written in the first book on The Horses Know. And I thought, there's so much of that does need to happen. And I don't know that was like in the second book, when you're working with the wild horses, they all do it later on. But then as the herd starts to release, it seems it becomes less violent than it was originally with Infinity, and I think some of the other horses too that were at the gathering. But I just found that to be so fascinating, because in real life, I think that does apply both to people. Sometimes you get to a point that you literally have an outburst or a breakdown because you have to release what is being held inside. And a lot of people don't allow that for the horses to happen. And it's such an injustice, because they do need space to process that. And yes, we hope that we're safe in a safe place when that happens, but it's so real for them.
It is, and it takes a lot of courage at times, because physically, obviously, if a horse starts doing that beneath you, that if they start to feel it's very important to hang in there with them and support them through it. And again, that pushes the rider to be even more strong in their core, being strong in the core physically as well as mentally and emotional, to be able to sit there and say, it's okay, I'm with you, I've still got you, I'm still keeping you in balance, just do what you need to do, and I'll help as much as I can.
Yeah, that was very interesting. When after reading that, then I had the experience of being a side witness to that. Okay, when you talk about perfect balance in the book, which is about getting the horse to carry itself and the human being in balance with them, do you, like when you were working with the wild herds, the horses like Infinity and is it Serene, some of the other horses that you were riding with, they would like demonstrate visually to the other horses. And do you find that when you work with your horses, or when you were working with Pi, did you do a lot of visualization to help them achieve what it is that you saw in your mind or that you knew that could happen? Did you actually use visualization for that?
I didn't actually. I think because I'd never done it before, I didn't really have I had a sense of what I was doing, but I didn't have an image in my head necessarily of what it was I was going for. She knew, and she made it very clear when I wasn't doing what she needed me to do. So I didn't actually. It would have been nice to have more of an idea what I was doing. I just knew that I was trying to help her to lift and sit back. I knew what that felt like, and then in order to help her to do it consistently so that she could just sit in that place and be in that place, I found very difficult, because as soon as my timing was out, or I didn't react quite quickly enough, she could feel very vulnerable and very scared at that point, and just say, well, hang on a second, you said it would be okay to do this, you said you had me, and now you haven't. So I'm trying, I'm really sorry, but I'm trying. No, it would have been nice to be able to visualize it, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was I was aiming for, other than having seen some of the top dressage riders achieve it with their horses.
So another thing, when you were talking about, I think it was in the second book, you were talking about the Woeful, which became the Kindred. And there again, if you haven't read the books, this might not make sense to you. I recommend that you read them. I feel like there's so much undercurrent within the books that actually is so possible to be brought to life in the world of horse and humans, and in the relationship between horse and humans in spirit. But in the second book, I think you address it when one of the Kindred now, for those who don't know, the Kindred was actually like a manufactured species. They were morphed to become something that was big killing machines, workers. And so then when their civilization, the human civilization, fell apart, the Kindred, or the way they were the Woeful before, they were so feared by the humans because they were very powerful. And yet really it was kind of the shadow side and the darkness of all the human that was like pushed into the Woeful, which, as they realized they needed to become, in human nature, I think we would call it our dark side, and we needed to marry into that dark side and bring the light and bring forgiveness to our dark side, or to our shadow side, or to our things that we perceive as our weakness. So in the second book, I think one of the Kindred begins to join Amarilla and her group that were coming back from her parents' thing. They were on this mission to find the elder. And you talked about how that because the Kindred, this fit, was so slouched over that it was hard for the horse to maintain balance. But yet what really caused her to be slouched over wasn't really her habit, her posture. It was everything that she had carried within her. And she was asked to forgive and to release, and that's what opened her up. And I found that to be very much a metaphor for us as humans, with our horses and without our horses. So I don't know if you can expound on that a little bit more, on what the intention was when you were writing that.
I guess, again, it was just really from my experience of when I used to be in that kind of posture, and it was just very much a protective posture, and just carrying things on my shoulder that I needed to release, and that wasn't helpful to me as a rider. So in order to be a good rider, I had to release it. And I think it felt important to kind of highlight how important our posture is, not just when we're riding, but to us generally, and how important that rounding of the shoulders that so many people carry is, and how important it is to try, whether it's the horses helping you or independently of that, to try to work to change that posture, because in doing so, I know from experience it can help you to release and to just find your own power. If your chest is open and express yourself, and not
it opens your heart space. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because there's a lot of things I won't do for myself, but for my animals, I will do it.
Absolutely, me too. And that's why I did it. I still have a tendency now, I can feel if that shoulder starts coming forward, even if I'm watching a scary film or something and I'm scared for the main character, I could feel that left shoulder just coming down like my heart. Like that, I know now. I know how it feels to feel straight and in a place that's powerful for me, having been pushed to get there by Pi. I know how that feels, and that even though I haven't ridden her since just before she passed, which was in June 2018, I still remember that, and I still carry that with me. So it's something that she's left as her legacy with me, that she's left me in this physically far stronger position.
And it's interesting that the horse actually did that as a gift to you. So that if you had never done that, you might have never written the books, in fact.
No,
Because by reading the books, I mean, you have to be open in your heart space and in your place of soul. And
exactly. Yeah.
There's something I just had. If I don't say something right away, I tend to forget it. I'll have to come back to it. Okay, I'll have to come back to it.
Yeah, no, I know how that feels.
Yeah, I'm terrible. My brain goes a mile a minute. Okay, so do you consider, okay, to me, I was telling you before we started the recording that when I read your books, I can't just sit down and leisurely read the book as a work of fiction, even though it is considered fiction, because I feel like there is so much undercurrent of truth within them that I have this huge urgency that we need to become so much of what is in the book, meaning this horse bonded, to where that we have such a closer mind and spirit connection with our horses. And so that we can understand, which will also bring us to more awareness of the world around us.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, okay, you talk about becoming aware, and you use that with a capital A, which is mean to tune into all of life or all that is. And do you feel like the writing about the aware and the horse bonded, what do you feel like that would be as far as metaphors for us in everyday life to be applicable? Do you have a way that you would describe that?
Sorry, to be aware, and what was the other part of the question?
To be horse bonded.
I think horse bonded already exists, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't necessarily take the exact form that I've written it in the books. With me, it did. I don't think it needs to, if I'm honest. I think in my case, Pi managed to batter through and actually communicate with me that way, because she'd failed to do it in a more subtle way. And I think with people who are more sensitive to what their horses are telling them, they don't. I think the relationship probably, and the bond is probably there every bit as strongly as it was between Pi and me. They possibly don't need to actually hear the horse in the way I did, if they're already sensitive to it and almost responding without needing that level of that communication, if that makes sense. And actually, I found that happened with me. Pi managed to batter her way through and communicate in a way that meant I put words to what she was managing to transmit to me, so I could communicate with her that way. She did that quite a lot, I would say, for the first 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And after that, I think as I became far more attuned to her, it was far less. If I asked her something, she'd communicate with me that way, but usually she wouldn't need to say as much to me. And I wondered, when I realised that's what had happened, I wondered what was happening. And when I thought about it, I actually kind of thought, I think it's because I'm sensitive enough to her that I'm responding to her without her needing to actually push it that far, if that makes sense. So I think in terms of the horse bonded, I think so many people, I mean, I have readers email and message and say how I described Amarilla being tugged by Infinity. That kind of happened to them. You know, they envisaged from nowhere the horse that they were going to find, and then they found them and just knew it was the right horse. I think it's something that's not just happening to me, that's happening to people everywhere.
Right, absolutely.
And I think with awareness, again, I think there are lots and lots of people who are aware, possibly to differing extents, depending on how aware they need to be, maybe, particularly where their horses are concerned. I think where the horse is concerned, they're always, if we're with them, then we're essentially bond partners. I think you know when you're with the horse that you connect with and you're going to be with for a long time. We all know that. I think heart horse is another word to describe it. A lot of people use. I think so many of us have that relationship, and I think those horses just choose to help us in the way that will be most helpful. And I think for me, to get my attention, Pi battered her way into my mind and spoke to me, if you like. She didn't speak, obviously. I put words to the energy I was receiving to her. So that was how I best took her advice and her help at times. other people might not need that. Other people might find that distracting and have help in a more physical way by the horse giving them more physical cues. But I kind of think all of that really happens already.
Yeah, interesting. I never thought about this before, but my bay mare, I don't use the word tugged, but I use the word signal. Like even if I'm in a herd or something, sometimes the horse will signal me. And I had a horse that he had foundered for no reason, it seemed like, at all. And so I struggled with him for 3 months, and his bones wouldn't stop rotating. So I had to just end the suffering. And it was horrific. I'd been with him every day trying to, sort it out, trying to make him comfortable, stop the rotation. And it just didn't happen. Yeah. So after I had helped him cross over, I had the weekend free. And what I did was I just didn't want to be at home at the barn. So I contacted a few rescues about coming to just volunteer for, a few days just to kind of be away from that and just kind of shake it off. And so only one rescue replied. So I went down there, and this woman had taken a herd of, I think it was 27 or 28 horses, Arabians, beautiful, well-bred Arabians. Sadly, the woman apparently had a mental health condition, and the horses fell into neglect, and animal control was going to come and get them and euthanize them all. And this is thousands and thousands of dollars of breeding, as well as all of these souls looking for their chance. Yeah. And another woman found out about them, and I don't really know her well at all. She replied, so I volunteered, but she saw what was there, and she told them she would take the horses. She couldn't afford them either. So it was really a tough situation, but I went there, and these horses, a few of them, the stallions, the woman had put in training. And what had happened is when she found out animal control was coming, she turned everybody loose together, 4 stallions and 18 mares. So there was mayhem there, and some of the horses were injured in the process of all of that. And apparently my mare that I ended up with is the one who just leapt into the trailer. And, they weren't trained to do anything. Most of them were unhandled, but they never were abused. But when I went to the rescue, the woman is showing me some horses here and here, and then she took me out to the pasture. And I'm a real mare person. I like to work with mares.
Yeah, me too.
And she took me out, and the first pasture had all these beautiful horses. Some of them really, like I know their breeding. Varian breeding is one of my favorite Arabian breedings, and she had some Varian breeding there. And they're lovely, but it's like nothing really just kind of gave me what I thought I was going to find when I got there. So we went to the back pasture, and there was 8 or 9 horses back there too. And I saw this bay horse throw her head up, rock it back, and then put it back down and put her head down. And I just zoned in on her. And at the time I didn't realize it, but she was signaling me or tugging me. And so I said, and that's not desired behavior to have a horse do that, even though Arabs swivel their head a lot. But I said, let me see her. And so we got her out, and I said, we put her in the big arena, and she had really never physically been that far from her pasture mates, ever, ever, ever. They were all in a herd. And this was, I don't know, a couple thousand feet from the other horses. So she was very anxious, as you can imagine. But she also, as she would circle, she would come really close to me. And like I said, I didn't realize any of this at the time, but at the time she did what I have learned to call later on is agreements. We made an agreement when she signaled me out there. And then when we were in the arena, even though I was just noticing how beautiful she was and how kind of powerful and not trained she was, but I realized that she was like sealing our agreement because she kept coming so close to me. Even though she was terrified, she still kept coming back to me. Yeah. So it's funny because I never even thought about that before until just now that the horse bonded, they get tugged. And for me, she did signal me. And I can see how our bond has really changed because things have not turned out the way I thought they would turn out. She's what I call more of an outlier. She's here to help me think beyond what I've known as acceptable before in the world of horse and humans. And because she'll resist me, but she never leaves my space. So it isn't like she tries to get away from me. She never tries to get away, but she resists until I can get the message as to what another possibility would be. So that's so interesting. I feel very honored now that I was tugged by a horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think if a lot of people look at their situation, they might come to identify that more, which I have to say, this whole conversation about being horse bonded is very magical, but it's also very endearing. And it's something that I believe happens between souls.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
I remember now what I was going to say earlier. You were talking about the heart and all that. And the Heart Math Institute has all this study now out about the coherence of the heart and the coherence of the horse's heart space, and how that it amplifies the human's heart space. It's really an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, the connections, it's incredible. And
it's a physical, measurable thing by science. You can actually measure that scientifically.
It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. Yes.
Okay, so those were kind of my main questions that I was digging after, is the part about perfect balance and then acting out and letting go. I think this is something that is good information for all of us to follow through on our horses, to allow them to let go and release everything that they've been holding inside. So do you have any ideas? This isn't about horse training. This is about your books and spirituality. Do you have any ideas on how a person might recognize if their horse is trying to let go and release something? I mean, Stoica, my friend's horse Stoica, there really wasn't permission needed. The horse was on the end of the line and she just did it. But
yeah,
do you think there's ways that horses will signal to us that they need to release things that has happened to them in the past?
To be honest, I think it's more a case of helping them into a position physically where they're able to, if they need to. That's how I would see it. And when I was teaching for some time, that's what I would do with all of my clients and their horses. And they were, to a horse, they were very, very keen to work on that with me, whatever their background. I mean, I did do a little bit of competition in dressage, but my focus was Pi was on balance more than anything else, and helping her to find her balance. And whenever I would go to see a new client, very often I was going to see horses that had various issues. I now remember I went to see one that did a lot of spooking and shying. And so we kind of ignored that, really. I wasn't going to address that. I wanted to find out what the horse wanted, how able she was to connect, to how interested she was in what I had to say, as much as anything else. And 5-10 minutes into the session, as soon as I started to just get the rider to feel what was happening beneath her, feel how she could possibly help the horse to connect, all of that behavior just disappeared. The horse was just completely focused on what we were doing and trying to work with us in terms of what we were trying to do with her. I went out to see another horse who would nap towards the gate in the arena constantly, and the rider wanted help with that. And the same kind of situation, really. Rather than work with that, I was looking at the horse's physical balance, where he looked disempowered. It was the best word I would say, and disconnected. And we started immediately just making the first tiny steps towards helping him to disconnect and balance better. And he didn't once nap towards the gate in that whole session or any of the sessions afterwards. And it's probably that the people that were drawn to work with me were those whose horses were very, very keen to do that work. And that's why they found me. But at the same time, there isn't a horse I've come across that doesn't want help to be away from that situation and to come to this situation. So it's why I felt it was so important, although the horses know is a fictional story, and I was advised against putting anything remotely to do with the technical side of riding into it. It was why I ignored all of that advice and did it anyway, because from my experience, it's something that's hugely important to horses to be able to connect, lift their weight up and back so that they're open and they're not shut down and on the forehand.
Okay, now that's a whole new, I mean, I've heard that before, and I'm very remiss in arena riding. I like to do trail. My horses like to do trail. But what I heard you say was something that I actually haven't heard before. So then when a horse is on its fore, yes, that could just be bad carriage or improper muscle, conditioning with a horse. But what I'm actually picking up from this is that when a horse is down and on its floor, its heart space isn't open.
Yeah, it's when it, like Pi was, because of her and experience, feeling disempowered and not very strong. I don't take credit for working that out for myself. I worked for many years with a really good osteopath in this country who had done an awful lot of research on the biomechanics of horses and the way they move. And he helped me to be able to see that he introduced the idea to me that as riders, we can have the potential. What he was seeing when he was treating horses was that if horses are born with a blueprint for health, so many horses he was being called out to see were being ridden away from that blueprint for health by being pushed onto the forehand by the rider's weight. Obviously, where we sit in a place where the rib cage is kind of stiller, so it's better placed for the horse to carry us, but it's right behind the horse's shoulders, which can't help but push the horse forward onto the forehand if we don't help them to sit back. So what he was saying was that as a minimum, when we're riding, we really want to be able to help the horse back to where it was before we got on. But further than that, we're actually in a position as riders to help those horses to be more physically empowered and strong by riding them than if they were just left alone to their own devices in the field. Which to me, knowing what Pi was trying to, so desperate to do, I found that hugely exciting, that I could not only help a horse to carry me in a way that wasn't detrimental to its physical and mental and emotional health, but I could actually do something to improve it beyond where it would have been if I'd never got on board at all. And so he helped me hugely with Pi. When I'd help her to lift and sit back a little bit more, if she got a bit stuck somewhere, he'd step in and release that and then tell me where to go with it, and I'd work on doing that a little bit more and then go back if either of us, I needed help too at times when I got stuck, so that we could carry on working towards that place where we were both strong and empowered, really, and had that sense of connection. The feeling when she was sitting on her hind quarters, so light and connected, that feeling of the rider being in perfect balance, where Amarilla feels connected to everything around her, that's exactly how it felt to me. And it's just an incredible thing to share with a horse and everything that's around you.
And so as a person who's not really keen on lessons per se, what I'm taking from this and what's actually opening a window for me to view things completely different is it's opening the heart space for the horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have never actually heard that mentioned before. I don't ever remember hearing it, but that is something that, there again, I won't do it for myself, but if it's going to help the horse open their heart space, because they're not rounded and closed in, just like with humans. And I actually have a massage license, so I look at body posture a lot, and people, I look at how they carry themselves. And when I see people that are so rounded, which is not the same as just bad posture. Some people literally, it's a reflection of that protection all in through their heart space. And so to think about applying that to horses is very, very interesting. I mean, there's those of us that really do read horses well through energy. We can see when a horse is shut down or whatever, when it's being invisible. But this kind of gives a whole new perspective on when you're with your horse and you're riding, to have them open their heart space, and as a human open your heart space, so that you can actually achieve so much more together.
Absolutely. And what's exciting is, and the osteopath taught me to look at, both for when I was teaching people and for when I rode Pi myself, was to stand back and look at her posture before I got on board, and just look for a point of balance where, it sounds awful, but if a rod was driven through her body, she would balance equally either side of it. Mm-hmm. And then look at her again, or look at my clients' horses after riding. Very often, if we're not mindful of helping the horse to to balance better, that point of balance will have shifted forward and down. If you've done a good job riding, that point of balance will have lifted up and shifted back. And that will mean that the horse is kind of in a position then to, at best open at the chest, but at the very least not have been closed down by the rider sitting on top of them.
And so if we look at this metaphorically, then if we're talking about how horse and soul and human and soul or spirit, when one or the other of us has balance, the other one is helped to bring into balance. Yeah, essentially. I mean, one can't really happen. I mean, there are horses that are able to organise their balance better than other horses, and the chances are they'll be able to maintain a better level of balance with a rider on board than others. But at the same time, my personal feeling is it's the rider's responsibility to at least make sure that the horse isn't shut down further by being ridden, that they're empowered rather than disempowered is what I would say. And I think that's why as I said before, that's why I made such a big thing of that in The Horses Know It. And also it occurred to me at the time whether I should not mention bridles, that kind of thing. In my experience from working with Pi and many of my clients' horses, neither I nor any of the riders I was working with to start with were good enough riders to have that sensitivity to be able to feel when the horse was going forward onto the forehand. When you feel a horse going heavier in your hands, it's obvious you can feel that it's extra feedback that you're being given. So you know you've got to work harder with your body and your legs and your posture to help the horse come back again. So it was something that I felt was important just to highlight, just to try and get that across, that the rider can make a huge amount of difference if they want to. And the way that I would translate that over is when they were in perfect balance, they communicated better. Meaning the being aware part was more.
Yeah.
And so even if we carry that over into our everyday life, if you are a person that rides your horse, when you become in better balance, you have more awareness as to how to communicate and to who that horse is, and the horse understands more who the human is, which would be, to me, the ultimate goal, is to understand that. So in your, you talked about Pi is the one who like instigated this whole thing and brought this out within you as far as what you would be doing as far as translating for her and creating these stories. Do you have other horses in your life that have been influential as well, or any of the other horses in your books based on personal experience with your horses?
Flame in The Horses of Joyce is based on a horse that my husband and I took on who was lame. I've never ridden her or done anything with her, but she's still in we still have her now, and she's just the warmest, most beautiful energy to be around. And people say to us we were either nuts to take her on or we were nice people to take her on, because she was a 5-year-old with an undiagnosed lameness, and we took her on to try and help her. But it really wasn't about that. It was really about recognizing the connection that she felt very strongly. She made it very obvious that she wanted to be in our lives. She was in the field next to Pi at a livery yard we were at the time, and as soon as I arrived on the yard, as soon as she could see me, she was very frightened of people, but she'd come and stand at the fence she shared with Pi and just stare at me the whole time I was there and get as close to me as possible. And then she wouldn't stop until I was driving away again. And we both just felt from her that she needed to be part of our story for some reason. Actually, I had most of The Horses of Joyce kind of in my head what that story was going to be, and I delayed writing it because I just felt there was a piece missing. And soon after, within a week or so of having Eden, we took her on from her previous owner. It became very clear who that was going to be and what part she was going to play in the whole thing. And she's just exactly as I've written her. She's just the warmest, bravest mare and she, every time I'm with her now, she just she'll come and put her head over my back and pull me a bit closer, so we have a proper hug, and it's a proper, the best way to explain it, I always feel like she kind of surrounds me and just gives me this space to remind me what's real. I think that's the best way of putting it. And I'm just actually writing a spin-off of The Horses Rejoice now, so she's that side of her character is being developed more.
And in The Horses Rejoice, she's the one who bonds with the kindred, which is bonding with the part of you that has been separated and has been abused and designed to be something that it was not originally intended to be. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
So this story is all about being different, which obviously is now immersed in a world of humans and away from her own kind, and she's very aware of her differences. And Flame is there to remind her, to help her to. The title of the book is From a Spark Comes a Flame, so I won't give too much away about the story.
Well, what's interesting though is in the book, Flame was injured by a woeful or a kindred, and then she ends up being bonded with one. And I just find that to be such a powerful metaphor or story to tell about how what once wounded us can become what actually makes us whole and what moves us forward in our life.
Absolutely. And you know, that is what happened to her. She was injured as a result of human beings, and yet she was so desperate to place her trust in us and to believe that we could help her, and allowed us to help her that way. She was so terrified but so willing for us to help her, and so desperate to trust. She's an absolutely stunning horse, really beautiful mare.
Okay, so we're kind of getting near the end of this. So I wanted to, do you have anything else you would like to talk about as far as an overarching theme or message that you hope to portray through this type of writing that you're doing? Writing, not writing.
The reason I wrote The Horses Know, and the reason I first kind of found the courage, I suppose, to release it, and then carried on, was because I really just wanted people to see their horses for who they really are. I know so many people already do that, but I just wanted, I remember once I went to do a consultation with somebody, and she told me that she was off the next week to go and have a spiritual experience with dolphins, swimming with dolphins somewhere, and her horse was at the fence right behind her going, hello. And I remember thinking that your horse is right there.
Yes, you know, that's tragic.
If you want a spiritual, you know, every day is a spiritual experience around horses, isn't it? And I think I just wanted to have that put across to people who maybe hadn't seen it that way, and to add weight to those who already saw it that way. I think almost just saying, yeah, I hear you and I'm with you, to people who already get that. So that was really what I was trying to do with that. I would just also like to say, because I do have comments and emails from so many readers saying, oh, I'd love to be like the horse bonded, I'd love to live in that world, and I'd love to be able to be how they are with their horses, almost as if they're falling short where their horses are concerned at the moment. And I suppose I would just like to say, for those who aren't aware of it already, whatever relationship you have with your horses is perfect. They'll have made sure of that. So if you're not hearing them in your mind, if you don't have the exact same relationship with them as the horse bonded do, that's just because you don't need that relationship. You possibly are already sensitive enough that you don't need to hear it, or your relationship's about something else. But whatever it's about, it's completely perfect as it is. So just be open to your horse and just take everything that they're willing to give you, because they're just, as you know, phenomenal creatures.
Yes, absolutely. And that is something I know you talk about in your books, that everything is as it should be. And boy, as a human, I just resist that. What's odd is I never seem to be able to change what it is that I'm resisting. But I really struggle with that as a human. It's like, no, 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 it should be like this. Or if you put forth this amount of effort and you tried this, then unjust things shouldn't happen. So that is something that as a human, I really, really struggle with. And I've been studying metaphysics for 30 years, and I still struggle with everything is as it should be at this time. It's like,
I think hindsight's really helpful with that, isn't it? Because in hindsight, you can always see it. It's always when it's happening at the time, it's really, really hard.
Sometimes in hindsight, I say, oh, I should have done that different. And, you know, I suppose there's a bigger message there for me on going with what is and having less resistance. So, okay, well, go ahead and tell people how they can get a hold of you, buy your books, follow. I think you have a Facebook page. How can they reach you? And then I'll also put them in the YouTube notes.
The Facebook page is called The Horses Know. I've also got a website, which is www.lynnmann, which is LYNNMANN.co.uk. You can contact me through there, and my books are all on there if you're interested. They're also on Amazon and all the usual places.
Okay, and so thank you so much for joining us. I just was, like I said, when I read your books, I feel such urgency, like we need to move forward to that type of awareness with our horses, and which leads us to awareness with all that is around us too.
Yeah.
So I do recommend reading these books if you're into horses and spirituality. They're really, they push you and they challenge you to look at bigger things. So thank you, Lynn, so much for joining me. I'm Delia with True North Equestrians, and you can find out more about the Soul Horse Sunday conversations with various people on the website. Lynn's will be up there. And if you need more, if you'd like more information about my work, just visit my website, True North Equestrians. Thanks for joining us.